Hello everyone, it's Silvia. Welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to have a look at 10 mass market decks that I think are unforgettable. So when planning this video, I asked myself if I should set a time limit. For example, a deck cannot be considered a golden oldie if it has been released after 2020. And then I considered that it's been already 5 years from 2020 and we are at the end basically of 2025, and there's a lot of people who started collecting during the pandemic, and for them a deck that they bought in 2022, for example, now that we are in 2025, can be considered as one of the oldest decks in their collection. But then again, if there's someone like me who's been collecting ever since, I don't know, 1988, a deck that has been released in 2022 is fairly recent. So honestly, I think that it's best not to have any kind of timeline or constraints about year of release of publication. And so what I do consider golden oldie is not depending on that, but it's mostly depending on a feeling that is associated to that. Say, for example, it could be a deck that reminds me of something that I went through, and it brings back these kind of memories, and there's some good vibes around it. But at the same time, it's not one of the recent decks that I'm still studying, and I'm still trying to discovering, so on and so forth. So basically, trust me, these will not be recent decks, but don't feel, if you want to do this deck, by the way, hashtag Golden Oldies, and you want to talk about a deck that has been released a couple of years ago, but because for you it reminds you of something that for you is a golden oldie, just go ahead and do it. It's absolutely fine. So let's start, and I have them all here, so I'm just gonna grab this one. I needed to start with something that remind me of the very first approach to a different tarot system rather than the RWS. Of course, I had to go with the Aleister Crowley's Thoth Tarot deck. This is from, well, it says here 1983. I don't think I bought it in 1983. So as I said, I have been reading tarot ever since I was 7 or 8 years old, but I started collecting them starting from 1988. However, these ones were still circulations back then. So it's actually really interesting that I ended up buying one of these decks without necessarily knowing that nowadays people will pay a lot of money for these kind of decks. So I originally didn't think that this was a greenie, simply because I don't have an official greenie and I cannot really compare the color of the borders. If you're not familiar with what a greenie is, it's a deck, a Thoth deck published by US Games that, well, actually it came with a bit of a mistake in the production. So obviously the borders were not supposed to be green. They were supposed to be whatever color this is. It's, I wouldn't call it a white, because even nowadays it's kind of a grayish kind of white, the newest ones. I didn't think that I had a greenie because this doesn't look green to me, but then I spoke to a dear friend of mine. She is actually a renowned expert on Thoth decks, and she says that some of these decks actually came out a little bit lighter. So I'm still not entirely convinced. I do trust her though, but you see, I don't really care, in the sense that I did not set out to buy a greenie deck. I paid whatever I paid, decades ago for this deck. It is the larger one, and I'm pretty happy to have this one, whether it's a greenie or not. But she did say that there's a lot of greenies that may look much lighter, and this one, according to her, this is one of them. As I said, I'm not gonna sell this deck. It's very safe in my collection, so it is, at the end of the day, quite irrelevant to me. And obviously I also heard that there's a way to establish that according to the what's it called, ISBN. So ISBN number, it's an identification number for books, and also apparently also any kind of printed publication, including decks. And that's why ISBN, yes. And so that's why she could determine that, because she did the research. And apparently there's even a website that lets you do that. So that is actually kind of cool. But in any case, so this is a Golden Oldie. This deck really never ceases to amaze me. It is incredibly powerful, obviously so, because, you know, it has been created or thought by Aleister Crowley. It has been hand-drawn, actually painted by Lady Frida Harris, and together they combined their efforts in order to produce something that was literally standing the test of time. Because, you know, obviously these kind of decks, then they've been considered a whole new system, because it was breaking up with older tradition. It was obviously not an RWS, and it was establishing an entirely new universe, basically, of conceived tarot. And let me just say, I had a phase in which my favorite card of the entire deck was the Death card. And this was by far my most beautiful, what I consider my most beautiful Death card in all of my decks. But we're talking about decades ago, and even though I had already started collecting, I don't think I had more than 20 or maybe 40 decks in my collection when I went through my Death phase. It went on for years, obviously. But I don't consider, so I obviously love to check out any cards. But I don't think that the Death card is my favorite card of the major arcana. It's definitely the Star card. So I don't know what that says about me, but in any case, this one was by far an incredibly powerful, beautiful, even when it comes to the colors and the contrast and the dynamics of the movement of this skeleton, you know, which is almost, you know, to the human brain, this looks really odd, really weird because of the angle of the legs, for example. But it's a skeleton, so really it can do whatever it wants. So I remember looking at this card and thinking to myself that it was absolutely stunning. And I still do. I still do. So this one is a Golden Oldie for sure. It's an amazing deck. Thank goodness I didn't trim the borders, because I also went through a phase in which I loved Thoth decks, this one in specific, with trims borders, and thank God I didn't do it. But in any case, this is definitely a Golden Oldie for me. And just to give an idea of the spirit of this video, I'm also going to show you a tarot deck that is actually not that old. And it's this one here. It's the Symbolic Soul Tarot by Elisa Seitzinger. I love this deck so much. And this one I think was released in probably 2022, 2023. So I can't find the year in here, but it doesn't matter. So I'm pretty sure that it's definitely not in the last couple of years, but it's after 2020. That's what I remember about this deck. So this deck is so cool, but so cool. And that's what I mean with Golden Oldies. So it's a deck that it's not recent, but at the same time doesn't have to be decades old. And it feels like a Golden Oldie to me, because it gives me that sense of wisdom that I do associate with aging. And so I just absolutely love this deck so much. Every time I talk about this deck, I think about all of the Easter eggs that are hidden in these decks. There's a lot of these cards that remind me of something, but by Easter eggs I actually talk about, for example, the octopus in the Queen of Cups, but there's many of these ones, and obviously now that I'm looking for one of them, it's difficult to find. This one, for example, is not necessarily an Easter egg, but this is a very interesting reference to the Mamutones in Sardinia, the island of Sardinia, which is a part of Italy. So as you can see here, these figures were, let's say, they're very important figures of the local traditions and myth and legends. And they have been covered with these pelts, obviously, but they also they have to go around wearing cowbells around their necks. I don't know if you can tell, but these are cowbells here and here. And the reason why they do that is because they need to warn the population that they are arriving. And so you can also see these masks. Now I have seen them. I would say that now they're part of certain celebrations in Sardinia. They're not, let's say, a common sight. You don't necessarily see them around. And these masks are really heavy. They are made out of wood, but they're very thick and very heavy. And so it is an amazing idea. They're supposed to, also embody some kind of local spirits. I would call them spirits. That don't necessarily call them spirits. Is local, let's say, energies and forces. So it is a really interesting tradition. And the Five of Pentacles, the reason why it's associated with the Five of Pentacles is because, as I said, they have to wear these cowbells around their necks in order to warn people that they're arriving. So obviously you can run away if you want to, because they're not necessarily evil, but they are outcast. So even more so, relating to the Five of Pentacles. But for example, I remember in other cards, there's a shoe for a head and stuff like that, and they all have explanation. All of these references have explanations which are really, really interesting. And let me show you. They are in the guidebook, because otherwise I wouldn't even know about them. When you go, even there you go, it's called Behind the Curtain. So if your language is English, it would be on page 39. And basically it explains to you all of these references. There's one in the Hierophant, one in the Chariot, one in the Hermit, one in the Justice, one in the Three of Cups, one in the Six of Cups, one in the Queen of Cups, the King, the Three of Pentacles, Four, Five of Pentacles. Talks about here the Mamutones, typical and strange figures appearing in Italian Sardinian carnival. So it is very interesting to go through all of these references and Easter eggs, as I call them, because this way it makes a deck easier to bond with. I don't know if you agree with that, but for me it's been definitely easier to bond with this deck, because I was looking at these cards, I was reading about them, and they certainly still look weird to me. These characters are not for the faint of heart. Some of them are really, really odd, as you can see here, for example. But at the same time, they become companions when you actually read with them, because they show you the way. They are very eloquent. They're kind of a chatterbox. As a matter of fact, this deck is very, very chatty. But at the same time, they also tell you that it's okay to be weird, that it's okay to be yourself. And it is a really amazing experience. And also lately what I'm doing, because it feels almost like it was meant to be. So I was looking at Instagram and I saw a deck by Debs Allen. It's called the Tomar Tarot, which is this one here. This is the bag it came in. And I absolutely love it because there's a lot of references here. And basically, for almost all of the cards, I believe the only cards that don't have a combination, so a reference to a different card, are the court cards. But as you can see here, for example, the Fool has the reference to the World card. And the Magician is a reference to the Sun and the Empress, and so on and so forth. And so I love tarot combination. It's something that really is my passion. And so I'm actually studying this deck. And at the same time, when I was using it, I thought to myself, you know what? It really makes me want to use it together with the Symbolic Soul. And so that's what I've done, basically. I have to take a few out of this one because it is thicker. And the Tomar is actually still in order because I am studying it, so I'm not going to shuffle it. But just to show you how well these two pair together, it is actually amazing. It's almost as if we were looking at two different versions. Like I love the Divya Moon and the paradoxical Divya Moon, because obviously there's this juxtaposition of the colors. This one feels exactly the same, and I just absolutely love it. And also, it helps that the I think that the art style is not the same, obviously. There's two different artists, but they are very similar. And also, there's something to say about the gold foil in the Symbolic Soul, which is not, it's matte, it's not gloss. So obviously, it's, you know, it's in theme. It's kind of very similar to this color here, which is not gold and it's not foil, but it does look very similar when you look at it through the lens, for example. And so, I mean, using these two together, using the references to other cards that are in these cards, for example, and also looking at all of the symbols in the Symbolic Soul, it really gives you an amazing experience. Just absolutely fantastic, and I highly recommend it. Now, having said that, this Symbolic Soul has been published by Los Carabel, so it's readily available. The Tomar Tarot is an indie deck by Debs Allen. She's based in the UK. Now, Australia is going to start shipping again to the US because they sorted the problems that they had with the documents. But I don't know what the UK is doing. So please get in touch with her because she'll be able to tell you if you're based in the US and you want to purchase a deck. She'll be able to tell you whether it's possible or not. Loving the star and the moon like this. So these two, absolutely amazing. But this one is what I wanted to say, to show you today, because it is a very, very much beloved Golden Oldie. Now the next Golden Oldie that I want to show you is older. It's an older deck. And I keep it in this bag. And it's the Voyager Tarot. You'll probably recognize it from the bags. So this is from 1984. I really love this deck. I know that there's a couple of, let's say, subsequent editions that are slightly different. Perhaps the borders are different. I never bought a second copy, even though sometimes I feel like I should, because I also know that there's a lot of people who successfully trimmed off the borders, but they still know which cards they're looking at. I don't necessarily know if I would be able to do that. I would probably have to remind myself with maybe a very small number here, like a 0 for the Fool or the Child on the bottom corner here, because otherwise I used to use this deck all the time, and perhaps back then I would have been able to remember what cards these are without the titles, obviously. But nowadays I don't think I would. And so I would certainly get confused about the aces. I will try. So this is the ace of crystal, for example. I would just try and count the number of crystals because I would think that it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I would think that this is the 6 of crystals, which is not, it's the ace. So I don't necessarily trust myself that much. But I have seen it trimmed and it looks absolutely amazing. But I'm quite happy with this one as well. I mean, it does have this really hideous kind of color for the borders, but it's fine. This is a deck that I actually bought because a friend of mine told me about it. Like, she was really insisting and she was like, you will like it. It's an absolute must. It's a collage. And I remember thinking to myself, how is that gonna work? A collage? It doesn't look like the RWS. There's so many things inside. It was one of those period of times in which I definitely prefer something simple. And looking at these cards, whenever I was trying to decide whether I wanted this deck or not, especially something like this, which is incredibly busy, I was thinking to myself, this is just gonna overwhelm me. It's too busy. I'm not gonna enjoy using it. I'm not gonna use it. And then, I just got it. I got it anyway because this friend of mine really insisted. And I have to say thank you, Marzia. You know who you are, Marzia. And because I really like this. I really like this. And it's been a while. It's been decades that I've got this in my collection. And I really think that amongst all of my collage decks, which I do have now because I do like them, it is probably the one that I like the best. I hope it makes sense. Maybe because it was the first one. Maybe it was, kind of at the first love in a collage deck. The first love that you never forget, that it's always very powerful and very exciting, etc. So this is definitely a golden oldie for me, and I have to be honest, I don't use it that much lately, but you guys know me, I always want to try out some pairings. So let me just pair it up as a bit of an experiment with the Quiet Rebel Oracle by Linestrider, because I actually really love this Oracle deck. It is absolutely amazing. I do pair it when I use it with the Rosebud Tarot and the Nightwait Tarot, because I really think that the energies and the vibes of those decks are very similar to this one. And also when it comes to the structure, you will always notice there, especially in the Nightwait, but also in the Rosebud, you do have this vintage feel to that, to the collage, but also the characters are in black and white. And by the way, because of that, thanks to that, let's say, you can also pair it really well with the Savvy Soul Tarot, because the characters on the Savvy Soul are also in grey, black and white or grey, let's say. So I'm just gonna try these two together as a bit of an experiment. I'm not entirely sure that it's gonna work, but this is how you find great pairings, because you try stuff. And I don't know, I mean, we are looking at collage decks. Although I will have to say there's a distinct modern feel to the Voyager Tarot rather than a vintage one. And there's no characters in black and white or grey tones. I'm loving this. Middle finger love, absolutely gorgeous. I don't know, I feel like it still works though. So beware, thought police with autonomy and the sun. So don't let yourself be distracted by the joy of the moment. Always keep at the back of your mind an eye out for all things that can happen, because we do live in a society where we need to be extremely careful. I was presenting the Lubanco Tarot on my channel, I believe for one of the very first videos to show for once in my lifetime that I can actually get my hands on a deck before everyone else, because generally speaking, if you live in Australia, we'll have to wait months, especially with US Games new decks, we have to wait sometimes even 6 months before they actually release them in Australia. So unless I buy them from the US and I get them shipped here. So I was really happy about it, but I had to, let's say, remove a couple of cards from the deck, because honestly it's becoming more and more difficult to show you know, some things that might be very intense in a deck nowadays because of the algorithms. And I always say this, I want to believe that they're just learning, so it's called machine learning, obviously. So one day we'll be able to distinguish, or the algos will be able to distinguish between a nudity that is artistic and with an artistic purpose, or even a spiritual purpose, and nudity that has other purposes. But for now, they're not. And I have been burnt. I have been burnt a couple of months ago. So now I'm very hesitant. I know that this will change, so please bear with me, but for now I'm playing it safe. It is what it is. In any case, I'm not entirely sure, but I will have to work with these two together, because I think that there's something there, but we'll see. But let's move on to the next Golden Oldie. So the next Golden Oldie is in this really gorgeous, beautiful bag by the Tarot Bag Ladies, and it's the Antique Anatomy Tarot. And I love this deck so much. This is the older version. I know that now it comes with a different cardstock, and I think that it's very thin. I don't have the newer edition. This is the older one. I really like it. There's nothing wrong with this edition. I think that there's a lot of people complaining about the new one, and it's also a different title. I think it's called the Modern Tarot Reader, but it's actually this deck inside. And this deck was originally called Antique Anatomy. So I don't know why they did that switch. In any case, really gorgeous deck. I absolutely love it. Personally, I am always fascinated by the drawings that they use in medicine, so antique anatomy drawings. And I think that this is perfect, because it's actually associating those drawings with plants. And I think that it's a fantastic combo. I mean, look at the King of Blades. Isn't it just absolutely gorgeous? I really, really love this deck. I just wanted to show you a deck that I use all the time with this one. In this case, let me just do this. There you go. Because the other deck has less cards, so I didn't want them to be I didn't want there to be too much of a difference in the levels. So I'm talking about the Anatomy of Healing. So this one was a Kickstarter campaign from, I believe, a couple of years ago. Frank Kisler is the creator of the deck. And by the way, Fran has a website, and I believe that this deck may still be available for purchase, but I'm not entirely sure. You'll probably need to check. And it's just absolutely gorgeous. Originally, I think I worked for this deck for something like 6 months in a row, because especially the booklet, it's really intense, very powerful, very healing. And so I was literally doing readings based on, let's say, inspired by these cards and these, whatever is written here. It is really powerful. Now, it's not just bones, so it's antique anatomy. And just for you to know, for example, there's a different deck that I used to use all the time, but with this one and the antique anatomy. And that was the Energy Ecology Oracle, which is just bones. So we had bones, just bones, and then a bit of everything when it comes to, antique anatomy or anatomy of the body. And it was just working wonders. So let me just show you. These are very similar. And by the way, if you have the Oracle of Oddities, and I don't understand why that one doesn't become a mass market deck, because I think there will be a lot of people interested in buying it. It's by the same author, creator as the Antique Anatomy, so Claire Goodchild. And also Claire is very prolific because she's made 3 different editions of the Oracle of Oddities, and I have all 3 of them. I put them together, so it's a really chunky monkey of a deck. But Claire also created the Memento Mori, which is originally a Lenormand deck, but it can also be used as an Oracle deck. And so I think that that will sell very easily. If they release the Oracle of Oddities as a mass market deck, I really think that it would be very well received. But then again, probably because it's an Oracle deck, there's more hesitation. I think that when you look at whenever there's this kind of, let's say, operation in which a mass market publisher looks into buying the content or buying the rights to publish an indie deck, they probably focus a little bit more on tarot decks rather than Oracle decks, probably because they think that it sells more. Personally, I think that, there's a lot of arguments either way. Are you feeling the vibes of these two together? They're absolutely fantastic. And again, if you don't have the Anatomy of Healing, but you have, for example, the Energy Archaeology, still use it. Try to use it with the Antique Anatomy. It will just read really, really well. So the Antique Anatomy, absolutely a golden oldie for me. What am I doing? I'm mixing up the cards now. Sorry about that. This would be very difficult to see if I make a mistake like that, because they basically have the same colorings. So let me know what you think in the comments below. I think that the Antique Anatomy definitely have that feel of Golden Oldies, and it also reads really, really well. For probably not for beginners, because there is a renaming of the suits, although it's very plain, very direct. But I would say, I don't know, maybe in some cases it will feel like it's pippish. It's actually not. There's always a good reason behind, for example, the 3 of elixirs. So, there's also references, and there is a really good guidebook. There's references between the flower that is presented here and the elixirs is obviously cups. So there's a lot let's say, going on in the cards that is not necessarily something that is immediately seen and appreciated on a visual level. So that's the reason why I'm saying maybe not for beginners, but then again, you do you. If it works for you, then go for it. So Antique Anatomy, Golden Oldie. So the next one is a tarot deck that I think a lot of people fell in love with, and more than that, I think that a lot of people bought this out of probably because of the aesthetics, and then they fell in love with tarot thanks to this deck, I think. Let me know if you're one of those, because I would love to hear your story. This is the Tarot of the Divine by Yoshitani, and this deck is inspired by deities, folklore and fairy tales from around the world. And it's true that there have been, before this deck, other decks that were focusing on fairy tales and associating fairy tales with the meaning of the RWS cards. In specific, for example, I'm thinking about the Elisa Hunt's Fairy Tale Tarot. Now this one is the Spanish version with the big book, so I'm really happy that I got this one when I did, because this book is fantastic, and we did a deck study of this deck together with my members. And I'm actually filming tomorrow the wrap up, the last video. I have to say something though, I really struggle because well, there were a lot of barriers, language barriers. I speak Spanish fluently, but I didn't know all of those fairy tales, so I had only the Spanish name to the fairy tale, and whenever I was trying to Google the fairy tale in English, I had to translate it in English, and it wasn't just a straight translation to the titles, and sometimes, you know, the Spanish title was referring to something different that was in the fairy tale, but not what I would have thought, and so I couldn't find them in English. And I know it's complicated, I'm probably not explaining myself very well right now, but it was an ordeal. So it took me, and then I was on holiday for 5 weeks, so it took me 3 months to just get through this deck study. But we'll talk about the next deck study in a couple of seconds, but just let's talk about the Tarot of the Divine. This is absolutely gorgeous, and as I was saying, it wasn't the very first one to bring in the theme of fairy tales into tarot, but it was certainly one of the most well-known or most popular ones. And ever since then, I know that they published a art book or a coffee table kind of book, which has a lot of information, and I would really love to have a look at that book because it might be really interesting. So this deck, at the beginning, I have to be honest, I wasn't really interested because I'm not a huge fan of the combination of colors in the cards. To me, I love the teals because the teal green is definitely my favorite color. Teal green, teal blue. So this kind of color is my favorite color. But then the association with, let's say, the oranges and these really pale yellows, it just didn't work for me. And you know, it may work for you, it may be your favorite deck. A friend of mine always told me this is my favorite deck. For her, this combination of colors is just the best. And it's absolutely fine because we're all different. What I do love and appreciate is the care with which Yoshitani has actually looked into these fairy tales. And it's true that in the original guidebook that comes with the deck, you don't necessarily get a lot of information, but the stories themselves can be Googled, you know, and you can find as much information as you want on them. And as I said, they did, ever since the publication, they did also publish a bigger book, let's say. So I'll be very interested to check that out. This is amazing. I love the art style. It's an amazing, really amazing looking deck. And I pair it up with another tarot deck, ironically, which is called the Star Maiden Tarot. Because of the colors being very, very similar, but also because it does help me focus more on the meaning of the cards. That is one of the risks, let's say, when you're looking at a tarot like this. Look at the King of Coins, it's just gorgeous. So the risk with a tarot deck that is very heavy on the theme, whatever that theme may be, you always have the risk of being distracted by the theme. So it's not necessarily a good idea if you're a beginner again, but as I always say, if this works for you, then go for it. It's a mass market deck. It's very affordable. Absolutely love it. It's one of my golden oldies. So talking about deck studies, I'm actually starting a deck study of decks based on animal energies and symbolism. So we voted together with my members. We just, every time we finish the deck study, we vote on the next one. And we voted on the Orion's Animal Tarot by Amber Sun. This one, it's more recent. Let's say it's probably one of the most recent ones that I'm going to show you today. But the reason why I included it in this video is because I'm actually going to do a parallel study with other animal-based decks, and one of the decks that was basically second, that was voted second, is the Wild Unknown Tarot by King Quen. So let me just zoom out because the Orion's is actually in a tin, so it's obviously quite tiny, but the Wild Unknown is rather big. So the reason why we started this is because I was talking to my members and they were saying, you know, we haven't actually done a deck study on an animal deck yet. And it's true. Even though we started a year and a half ago studying decks, it's true that we haven't done anything, even more than a year and a half. But in any case, so it's true that we haven't done any animal decks, and there's so many animal decks out there that it felt like I was actually actively excluding them from a deck study, which is not true. And I thought to myself, okay, I'm just gonna give the members the option to vote between these two, then another one, which I don't remember what it was. And then I always give the option of other and specify which one the members would like to study. And sometimes, you know, when someone actually proposes a deck, there'll be other members joining and saying, I actually prefer that deck like that person said. But in any case, so the Orion's won, but this one was a close second. So I'm thinking instead of sticking to one deck, I'm telling my members we're going to follow the animals from the Orions, but we're going to keep an eye on the Wild Unknown, the animals, you know, represented in the Wild Unknown, and any other animal deck that you may have. So it's actually going to be a study on animal energies and symbolism. So I'm hoping it will be really cool because it's also really, really cool books. For example, this one, and also I bought this journal. It's fantastic. I don't know if you guys have it, if it's being released, because I know that it's rather recent also in Australia. So this is called the Orion's Animal Light Journal by Amber Sun, and this is actually released by Rockpool here, as you can see. But this is not just a journal, or rather to me it doesn't feel like a journal. Let me just quickly show you, because you have basically all of the major arcanas. So it does show you here all of the major arcanas. I don't want to break the spine, but as you can see here, so you have a really big page with a full color card. And then, you know, this is the Fool, the journey ahead is shrouded in mystery. However, I will still move towards it. And then it talks about the card. So it says, the Fool is the first card in all tarot decks and it represents the beginning of your journey. Like the young sea turtle, you are at an important junction in your life and at start of the new path of self-discovery. Take it and see where it leads. But first of all, let's figure out who you are right now. And then, you know, it gives you a lot of prompts, so it's not a blank journal like a notebook. It's actually very easy. It's a really good tool for meditation and journaling. I highly recommend it, especially if you like the tarot deck itself. So it does this for, as you can see, it does give you a lot of prompts and also coloring if you are so inclined. And it does that for all of the majors and all of the core cards. So let me just go to the end of the majors, and now it moves to, and aces as well. So ace of wands, and then it goes to the page of wands. So it gives you the aces and the core cards. It doesn't give you the minors from 2 to 10. It doesn't necessarily change anything. It's incredibly well thought. I think that it's very, very conducive of some fantastic meditative work and journaling work as well. So I'm really looking forward to use this with my members, because I'm definitely going to We're definitely gonna film a few videos where I'm gonna try to do all of these. For example, this one says, fill the cups below with names, places or activities that can help you in these aspects. If you can't think of anyone, consider where you could find support in these areas. And so, for example, this cup is for mental emotional support, a safe place or a person you can confide in. Professional, mentors or teachers who support you in your professional goals. Physical, an accountability buddy or motivator who helps you reach your health goal, and so on and so forth. So this is going to be lots and lots of fun, but it's also going to be very deep and very interesting. And so I'm really excited about this one. And as I was saying, it's going to be our current deck study. And then let's say I will talk about what's going to happen in October or towards the end of October. But first, let me just show you these cards because they're really, really gorgeous. They are a bit dark, so I was kind of hoping, I had the original indie deck, the mini one, and I was kind of hoping that Rockpool would have tweaked a little bit the maybe the exposure or the, let's say, the brilliance on the cards to make them a little bit lighter than this. But that's okay. I mean, this was as it was released intentionally, you know, created by Ambisan, who's, by the way, Australian. So I'm really happy to be able to show you this because it is the proud of a fellow Australian. And it's an amazing deck. Really, really beautiful. Absolutely love it. This is a golden oldie for me, not necessarily because the deck itself is a golden oldie. So I believe it was released in 2020. I could be wrong, the original indie one. But because animal energies for me always refer to something eternal. And so it does have that kind of vibe and those kind of feelings. And just to show you, because obviously we've been talking about the wild unknown as well. And this is, I believe this one is, let's say, one of the most popular decks outside of Thoth, probably, and the usual RWS out there, the Wild Unknown, because it is a deck that I would say it changed a lot of people's perspective on how to read tarot, and it uses animal energies in a very specific way. I had to say that originally I wasn't really interested in this deck. I found it to be a bit closed off to me, like I couldn't really bond with it. I bought it, I bought a copy, I worked with it, I studied it. I saw a lot of people trying to bond with this deck by coloring the images, coloring the, for example, the animals here. And the result is amazing, but I don't have that kind of skills, so even coloring within the lines would be rather difficult for me. I do use this one in combination with the Connected and Free Oracle, which is still indie, by the way. So the Connected and Free Oracle is released, has been created by the same creators as the Lumina Tarot, but the Lumina has become mass market, has been picked up by Rockpool, actually, I believe. But the Connected and Free Oracle is not mass market, at least not yet. Maybe one day. I do believe that there was a French edition of it that was mass market, but I don't know about any English edition. In any case, as I was saying, this one, every time that I pair it up with the Connected and Free, it starts to make sense. It starts to bond with me. I start to have a really good conversation with the deck. But by itself, it doesn't, and it really does not work that well for me. But it still is a golden oldie because it is undeniable that this deck, it is so very famous. And as I said, I really do believe that it's changed a lot of people's attitude towards tarot. A lot of people that were not necessarily into decks that were slightly different from the RWS, or were also always depicting humans, so people, and they didn't think that a deck with animals could work. They probably changed their mind when they saw this deck, when they started using it. I didn't have that problem, but honestly, this deck, I cannot deny that it's an incredibly powerful and incredibly important deck in the history of tarot. So definitely a golden oldie. Another unforgettable deck is the Cantigee Oracle. So this is let's say the graphics, the art is by Laura Sussman, but it's been written by Ray Diamond. But let me just zoom out because the box is rather large. Now, this is one of the decks that I think a lot of people bought because it is undeniably really beautiful. Let's say it's very artistic. Obviously, if this type of art doesn't resonate with you, then you would not like it. However, this is one of those decks that people actually bought because of the guidebook. And I'm probably one of them, even though I have to say I really, really love the art style as well. But look at this chunky monkey. It's absolutely amazing. And the work you can do with these cards and this book is just nothing short of a miracle. I use it now for my members when I do the weekly energies of the week readings, where I divide all of the zodiac signs into the 4 alchemical groups, and then I do a reading specific for that alchemical group. And so what I do, because it actually does come with at least 4 pages, I believe, for each and every card, so it will be too long a video to read everything, but I do read the keynote. And I also read either the practice, which is this one here, or the creative prompt. But let me tell you, there's so much that you can do as meditation, but also really active kind of work with this deck that is just absolutely blowing my mind. And it's a golden oldie because, as I said, not super duper recent, not super duper old, but at the same time, this is one of those decks that came out. Perhaps this one is on the tail end of that movement, but I don't know if you remember, there were Oracle decks that came out with a lot of work to be associated with them, and now you still have them, but they're indie decks. This one is not an indie deck, it's actually a mass market deck by, let me just double check, because obviously now I cannot find it. I don't think it's North Atlantic Books. But in any case, you can find it in your shops, for example, or your online retailer. And I would say it was at the tail end of a wave of those decks that were used in many retreats, for example, you know, all of those activities related to meditation and journaling, and you know, also shadow work, for example, inner child healing work and stuff like that. But now you can still have those decks, we can still find them, but they're mostly indie decks, and generally speaking you will find them, for example, in a Kickstarter campaign. So they're not obviously accessible to everyone. This one, being a mass market deck, is actually accessible to everyone. And there is so much work you can do. So obviously here there's a bit of an introduction to card, in specific card 26 you are seeing. Then there's a keynote. You are seen. Your presence is felt, your actions and thoughts are impactful, therefore be in your excellence and do whatever is right for you to do. And then it goes on, it gets better, because it gives you the symbology, it gives you a bit of guidance, it gives you as an icon. So for example, let this card remind you that you are seen even when you feel invisible. If, for example, you keep this card, if you do a 1 card pull every morning and you pull the card and you put it on a card holder, for example, and you keep it on your desk the whole day, this is very helpful because it will guide you on all of the let's say the feelings that will be triggered when looking or thinking about this card. As a portal, let this inquiry open you to receiving the gifts of this archetype. What if everything around you sees you just as clearly as you see it? So obviously it puts you in a very conducive state of mind for healing, I believe. Then the practice, go outside, choose something, a flower, a tree, a stone, even a bench or a doorway, anything that you don't usually think of as having the ability to see. When you look at this object or plant, cultivate an awareness that it is also looking at you. How might you look from the perspective of this object or plant? Try to see yourself through its eyes. I think that writing this book was definitely has been guided by some very strong spiritual power. This is an incredibly amazing book. I just really love using it for my members now. I don't know why I haven't done that before, but it will be also a really interesting deck to study. but I do prefer to study tarot decks rather than oracle decks, even though there will be enough material here. Then creative prompt, create a self-portrait in your medium of choice from your perspective of someone or something else, and then ecological connection. I highly recommend this if you want to do a lot of work. However, when it comes to the actual cards, I will have to say something. So this is the English version, and it comes, as you can see, as a round deck. It is also rather large, and because of those two reasons, this is not a very practical deck for me. I do struggle a lot. I do have a lot of injuries in my fingers, so sometimes my fingers actually hurt. And when it comes to a larger deck, or even in this case a round deck, it is rather difficult to shuffle for me. Smaller would have been better, but I certainly don't want to trim it, and also I wouldn't know how to trim it. But in any case, so these are the cards, and if you have the... So Laura Sussman is also the creator of a tarot deck. I believe it was called the Luminous, either the Luminous Tarot or the Numinous Tarot. Apologies for that, but the artwork is very recognizable. If you do have her tarot deck, you would definitely recognize this, and I really like it. I really like it. At the beginning, I thought that it would have felt a little bit creepy for me because there's a lot of eyes. So if you know, you don't like eyes, very clear eyes on your cards, then perhaps this is not the deck for you. If that is okay, you're okay with that, then have a look, consider this deck, because it's absolutely amazing, and I love the colors, and watercolor is probably my favorite medium, artistic medium. Kissed by Whale Spray. How cool is this? And as I said, maybe the messages or the sentences at the bottom of the cards are not immediately recognizable for the work that you can do with the card, but if you refer back to the guidebook, you will see that it opens up a whole world of possibilities. The unburied bones, for example. So really, really love this deck. It is a golden oldie because, as I said, I believe this is one of the last mass market decks that really gave you the possibility to do a lot of work on your practice. And now, as I said, it's more typical of a Kickstarter campaign for a tarot deck, for example. I feel that, and I could be completely wrong, but I feel that mass market publishers, or at least the bigger ones, are not taking a lot of risks. Like I was saying earlier, they would prefer to choose an indie tarot deck rather than an indie oracle deck to publish mass market, because I think it's obviously related to marketing research, and maybe they know or they think that a tarot deck will sell more than an oracle deck. Personally, I would buy both. I know that the French version of this deck comes with just a book, and at the end of the book you have a few pages where you have the cards printed, and then you have to obviously trim it, and doing so they will be rectangular. So I may look into that, because I will definitely keep the English version, but having these cards in a standard tarot format, for example, would be absolutely amazing. But when I hope for something like that, I also know that it's never gonna happen. Like, I've been saying that I hope that they will republish the Dark Goddesses Tarot without the banner on top, because it really is obtrusive and it cuts into the drawings, the fantastic images of that deck by Ellen Lorenzi Prince. I've been saying that forever. Everyone has been saying that for forever, and it's never happened. And so, you know what, it probably won't happen, but it is on my wish list if ever there will be a reprint of that deck, and many other decks that are circular or round in a standard format. I would definitely acquire them. So then moving on to the last two decks. So this one here, we've talked about this one, or some of you actually commented on one of my videos when I was talking about this deck. This is the Gothic Tarot of Vampires. It's a Los Carabao deck, but it's unfortunately out of print. So what I wanted to say is that, because this person commented saying it would be really cool to do a deck study on this deck, even though it's an out of print deck. I am going to organize towards the end of October, once we're done with the study of the animal decks, we're going to study a spooky deck for October. We haven't voted yet of my members. I never decide on, by myself. I always give the possibility to my members to vote on a deck that would like to use. But for the end of October, I would really love to focus on a vampire deck or, you know, a zombie deck. But in any case, a Spooktober kind of deck. And this one will be really gorgeous. Like, I completely understand why this one would be interesting. Because it really feels like there's a story behind these cards, and it would be really, really cool to get to know this story and study it. So it is an idea. But as I always say, if we end up, whether we end up studying this deck or another vampire themed deck, for example, the material that I provide, so I do a lot of work when we do a deck study, a lot of research, but I also write down a lot of material that I then share in a PDF file for my members to download and use however they want. So there's a lot of work that goes behind my deck studies. And at the end of it, if you print out all of the PDF material, you have a chunky book, because that's as much. Sometimes I write something like 17, 18 pages for a suit, just because I think that it's interesting. And then I do, not always, but I almost always do an accompanying video in which I go through the PDF material and I explain what I've done. So obviously this gives me the possibility to focus on vampire energies in general. So if you don't have this deck, you want to join my membership, because we're going to study this deck or a similar deck for Spooktober, and you have another, for example, spooky deck or a vampire themed deck, then you can always join, because the deck study will provide you with enough material to follow on the what we're doing. Now this one is a golden oldie for me, because I think that even though we didn't start with tarot associations with the spooky world, the horror world, I think that nowadays we have so many decks that have these kind of energy. So whether it's a zombie themed deck or it's a vampire themed deck, there's so many out there. And I personally really, really love these vibes. So for me, this one was a unicorn deck because I found it at the Tokyo Tarot Museum. I've always had it on my wish list. It is unfortunately out of print, and I believe that is from the, I don't remember specifically what year this deck came out in, 2003. I thought it was late 90s, to be honest, but it's from 2003. In any case, as I said, we're probably going to focus on a vampire, or in any case, something related to the spooky themes of horror movies and horror literature for the end of October. You know, and so I was thinking, if you don't have that deck, even if you have Tarot V by Alejandro Colucci, which is also by Lo Scarabeo, it's, you know, it's those kind of energies. But the last deck that I wanted to talk about today as a golden oldie is this one here, which is in a very nice bag, and it's the Linestrider Tarot. I don't know why, but this deck by Charlotte Thompson, by the way, it was very popular when it came out, and then all of a sudden I just don't see a lot of people using it. So Charlotte Thompson has also released another couple of decks, the Hadrid Oracle, Botanical Oracle, the Winter Seer Tarot. There's another Oracle deck based on animals, for example. So for example, if you're one of my members, you have the animal-based deck by Charlotte Thompson, and you don't have the Orions, you can use the other deck as well. Sorry, closing the parenthesis. So I really love this deck. I've always liked it. There's a lot to be said about decks that have this much white space around them, because it's all about emptiness and fullness, and so focusing on what is on the card, but also understanding that there is this sense of framing with the white. So we're looking at the Four of Wands here, for example. These are two hairs. They are put in such a way that it looks like a circle, and also almost like a wreath because of these leaves out here, as we can see. So it obviously refers to the sense of completion of the circle. And, you know, generally speaking, we look at the Four of Wands as the card that embodies the Emperor in the suit of Wands. Outside of the court cards, because it does present you with the contract, the wedding, the contract, the celebration for the re-establishment of the order after the chaos. And it's not necessarily a negative chaos, but if you think about the sequence of the reading, you go from the Two of Wands to the Three of Wands to the Four of Wands. So you have already gone out, your ships have returned, you have all of these new people in your realm, you don't really know what to do, but the Four of Wands with the celebration of this new reality, this new order, gives you the possibility to understand what your role is. So it is, let's say, very symbolic in the sense that you can still read this deck. Again, I don't know whether a beginner would read well with a deck like this, because it tends to be minimalist. Let's say, not necessarily, I don't think minimalist is actually the right word, because you do have a lot of symbols here, there's a lot that goes on in the cards, but at the same time, because there is so much emptiness, so much whiteness in the cards, it doesn't necessarily, let's say, help you with visualizing the elements that you would be able to find on a tarot deck. But the Eight of Cups, for example, is very easy to understand. It's the person that is just fed up. They probably receive some news they not expect. And so these are not necessarily the news that we were expecting. And you say, you know what, I'm just gonna leave because there's nothing that I can fix. And so you leave this kind of broken news behind you. So it is symbolic, it's very powerful, very conducive of also a certain type of work that you can do with your deck and within your practice. Personally, I really appreciate this deck. I like the colors, I like the art style, I like the fact that there's a combination of, you know, probably lines and watercolor as well, which is, as I said, my favorite thing. And it's a golden oldie because, you know, it's just one of those decks that also feels like it's endless. You know, it presents you with an idea of a snapshot in time and it just stays there. So you can go back and revisit anytime you want. But that was it. So that's the last one that I wanted to show you today. And as I said, these are my golden oldies, but there's so many more, especially because there's a lot of golden oldies when it comes to oracle decks, but today I just wanted to focus on mostly on tarot decks. In any case, let me know if you want to pick it up as a tag. Just you know, tag me on your video. It would be very nice to see your choices. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you the next time. Bye.